The price of silence. Marina learned to pack in silence. She folded shirts like letters she would never send, slid a photograph between two sweaters so it would not bend, tucked her passport into the inside pocket of a coat that still smelled faintly of detergent and the mango shampoo her daughter used. Outside, the sky over Bangkok was heavy with heat and swallows. In the apartment, the only sound was the click of her daughter's nail polish bottle. Lila had chosen a color called New Horizon, a pale optimistic coral that glowed against her brown skin. "We're really doing this," Lila said without looking up. "You're not going to change your mind at the last minute?" "If I were going to change my mind," Marina said, "I wouldn't have sold the last piece of your father's furniture." That was the part she didn't say aloud, that she had wrapped the carved teak chair in newspaper like a body, that she'd handed it to a stranger who admired its lines and not once asked who had sat in it to tie their shoes, or who had fallen asleep in it with a feverish forehead. She told herself it was only a chair. She told herself leaving was not a betrayal of memory, only a rerouting of it. Lila capped the bottle and swung her legs off the table. "I'm not scared," she said, and smiled with the kind of bravery that makes mothers ache. "I am," Marina said, "then I'll be brave for both of us." They left 2 weeks later. The city thinning to flat coins of light beneath the plain, each coin spinning its own story. On the flight to Berlin, chosen because a cousin's friend said the city was cheaper and kinder than London, Lila pressed her forehead to the window and whispered, "Goodbye, old life," as if the earth could hear her through the glass. Berlin in October tasted like metal. The air smelled of wet leaves and engines. They rented a room in a shared flat above a bakery that woke before dawn, filling the stairwell with warm sugar. Marina found work washing dishes at an unassuming Thai place with a red paper lantern that never quite stopped swaying. The owner, a woman named Kanya, had left home 20 years earlier and never returned for more than a week. She hired Marina with a nod and a warning, "This life is held together by hands. Keep them strong." Lila enrolled in a language course and colored her notebook margins with small drawings of the city, trams, spires, a dog with a single black ear. She picked up shifts at a bookstore where tourists came in to take shelter from the rain. She made friends faster than Marina could memorize the names, friends who came from countries she had only ever read about in headlines. At night they cooked together in the small kitchen, jasmine rice steaming beside red cabbage, fish sauce beside mustard. They ate at the scarred wooden table and talked about the structural elegance of the U-Bahn and the way the light lasted longer than it should in early evening. The women who worked at the Thai restaurant called Marina by her nickname, Rin, and asked very little about her past, which was a kindness. On her second Saturday, a man came in and asked for a table for one. He had the kind of face that never fully revealed its age, a careful smile, a gray scarf coiled as neatly as a promise. He glanced at Marina and then at the menu. "Order for me," he said to Kanya in practice Thai. "Whatever you're proudest of today." Kanya laughed. "We're proud even on our bad days." "Then choose something from a good day." When she brought him grilled chicken with tamarind and a heap of mint, he asked, "Who cooked this?" "Everyone," Kanya said. "But she," and she tilted her chin toward Marina, "marinated it." He looked over. "Thank you," he said to Marina. Not the way a customer speaks to a server, but as one artisan to another on a shared bridge. His name was Elias. He worked as an interpreter for conferences, slipping between languages like a swimmer between lanes. He came back the next week, and the week after, and the one after that, his appearance irregular enough not to be expected and steady enough to feel like a pattern. "I can't place your accent," he said one evening when the rush slowed. "Where did you learn German?" "In the kitchen," Marina said. "And watching the news." "I wouldn't have guessed," he said, and Marina couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment. "People forget language grows in every room you ask it to." He began to linger after paying, with a cup of tea that cooled too quickly in his hands. On those nights, Marina walked home with a small extra hum inside her, like a song remembered in fragments. Lila noticed but did not press. She had started staying out later, her new friend sweeping her into bars where the floor stuck slightly to the soles of your shoes. She came home smelling of cinnamon and rain. Marina tried to pretend it did not worry her. In December, Elias arrived with a bouquet of eucalyptus and a question. "Would you come with me to a recital? A friend's daughter plays viola." Too many adults clap as if they've never felt a string vibrate against bone. Marina made the sound someone makes when they are given a gift they are not sure they're allowed to accept. "If my daughter doesn't mind." Lila was kneeling on the floor, unknotting a tangle of lights she'd bought second-hand. "Why would I mind?" she said. "Go. Enjoy what is it, viola?" "It looks like a violin that learned to think before it spoke," Elias said, smiling. And the way Lila laughed made Marina both proud and afraid. They went. The hall was small and full of earnestness. Afterwards, he bought her tea and asked about Thailand, about her late husband, about what she missed. She surprised herself with the answer. "Monsoon season," she said. "Being forgiven for staying home." The sound of rain arguing with the roof. They began to see each other on her days off. He showed her the river in all its gray moods. They walked through a market where a woman sold mushrooms that looked like small umbrellas. "You could live here forever," he said once, not as a proposal but as a hypothesis, as if he were testing the strength of the word forever against her. She said nothing, and he didn't seem to mind. He had been married once, he said. No children. He spoke of the past as if it were a room he kept tidy but never entered. With Marina he was kind without being sweet, attentive in the unshowy way of someone who has learned to listen for the faults in a sentence and not press on them too hard. In January, he met Lila. He handled it carefully, arriving with a carton of pastries from the bakery downstairs and asking Lila what she was reading as if the answer mattered. Lila watched him the way a cat watches a new piece of furniture, circling, sniffing, deciding where it might fit in the room. "His hair is too neat," she told her mother later, smiling. "But I like his shoes." "You judge men by shoes?" Marina said. "I judge the world by everything," Lila replied, which was true. February brought snow as delicate as ash. The Thai restaurant's pipes failed twice. The second time, Kanya swore to move to Portugal one day and sell soup by the sea. Marina wrapped her hands at night because they ached. Elias bought her a pair of gloves lined with something so soft it felt illegal. "Don't buy me things," she said, though she kept the gloves. "I'm not buying you." He said. "I'm buying your handsome years." They began to spend time at his apartment on Sundays. It was not grand, just well loved, books arranged by the color of their spines, a plant that always drooped and always revived, a photograph of a man on a bicycle. He gave them both keys without ceremony. You may need to borrow my kettle, he said, and the trust felt like a door propped open with a stone. Lila took to stopping by to do laundry when Marina was at work, bringing a friend along sometimes, leaving a trail of laughter and detergent. She and Elias talked about music, about photographs staged to look like accidents, about the way Berlin reinvented itself annually and still refused to be understood by anyone who insisted on understanding. He tolerated her teasing. She found his patience both admirable and irresistible. Spring came reluctantly. The bakery downstairs sold tiny strawberries that tasted like small suns. Lila started a project called Goodbyes I Didn't Say, a series of photographs of places that had once held the shape of a person she'd lost, the bench where she last waited for her father, the hallway where a teacher had told her to speak louder. One afternoon she photographed the kitchen at Elias's, a spoon left to tap 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 against the edge of a bowl, 2 cups side by side with their lips touching. Marina did not notice the way Lila had begun to dress differently on Sundays, nothing scandalous, just a thread pulled tighter, a sleeve rolled up as if to invite the day closer. She did not notice how often Lila's phone lit up with a message that made her eyes complicated. She did not notice the shift in the air between her daughter and the man she was learning to love, or maybe she did and chose not to name it, believing that unspoken things could be starved to death. In June, Elias suggested they take a small trip, the 3 of them, to a lake that held the sky like a bowl. We can swim if we're brave, he said, or I'll watch from the shore and pretend to judge your technique. I'll pack sandwiches no one asked for. They went. On the train, the countryside greened like a forgiving thought. Lila sat by the window and hummed, her head against the glass. On the shore, she ran into the water with a wordless cry and came out shivering with triumph. Marina waded in to her knees and stopped, the water pinning her skirt to her calves. Elias stood beside her and said nothing until she was ready to go deeper. They were happy that day in the way that scares people who know what happiness costs. In the late afternoon, Elias fell asleep on a towel, face shadowed by his hat. Lila took a photograph of his hand splayed open on the grass, then of her mother's hand near it, then, without thinking, moved her mother's hand away and placed her own where her mother's had been. The shutter whispered its small theft. The first true fracture revealed itself a month later, on an evening thick with heat. Marina was closing at the restaurant when a courier arrived with a small parcel addressed to her. No return name. Inside was a camera. Not new, one of those sturdy midnights of machines that survived decades. Taped to the black body, for the hands that keep a kitchen fed, a lens that keeps a room honest. She recognized Elias's tone. She recognized Lila's handwriting on the envelope. She had dropped it off. The combination was benign and yet made something swivel inside her. She took the camera home with mixed gratitude and unease. Do you like it? Lila asked brightly. He told me he was terrible at choosing gifts. He wanted to give you a book about bread ovens. I like it, Marina said, placing the camera carefully on the table as if it might bruise. It is unnecessary. Lots of good things are, Lila said. That doesn't make them wrong. Elias arrived with wine and a new word in a language neither of them spoke. They cooked. They ate. Marina watched the way Lila watched him. Every glance is a sentence in a language we don't teach our children because they learn it too well on their own. Marina changed the subject frequently, Conversation is a bright cloth you can throw over a stain. For a while, it was a Wednesday in August when the truth knocked. Marina finished an early shift and decided to surprise Elias with a bowl of noodles and a new story about a customer who had ordered the spiciest dish level only my regrets can understand. She climbed the stairs to his apartment. Keys in her pocket but noodles too hot to set down, so she knocked with her foot because the world is cruelly comic. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. They had that kind of trust. Inside, the room was dim and smelled faintly of shampoo. Marina set the noodles on the counter, called Elias's name, and then saw a hair tie on the table, the coral color known to her bones. She saw a glass with a lipstick thumbprint that tilted toward her own shade. She told herself there were explanations. There are always explanations. She walked down the hallway. She did not intend to open the bedroom door. She opened the bedroom door. What she saw was very human and therefore unbearable. She made a sound she did not recognize as hers. Lila scrambled for a sheet the way a child grabs a schoolbook when they realize they've missed the bus. Elias rose with more slowness than the situation required, as if he were stepping into a role he hadn't rehearsed well enough. All three of them were suddenly citizens of a country they had never meant to visit. Marina shut the door gently because she had learned early that violence of movement has its own gravity and she did not want any more of it in the building. She stood in the corridor with the framed photographs that had once made her feel welcomed by time, and she waited for the silence to say what it wanted to say. When the door opened again, Lila's face was turned to apology and defense at once. A terrible new facial architecture, Mom, she said, and then, because she was still someone's child, Mama. No, Marina said, taking a step back as if from a window without a railing. Don't rename me to spare yourself. It wasn't, Lila began, it was, Marina said. Whatever words you try to use will be smaller than the thing you did. Elias stood behind Lila, his hands extended in that European gesture of reason that asks to be let in like a polite burglar. Rin, he said softly. I don't know how to. You do, Marina said, because she was suddenly expert in what people say when they say they don't know. You know exactly how to. And you've decided not to yet. The argument that followed did not break windows or attract neighbors. It was the tight, precise argument of people who know language is an instrument that can make people faint or stand. Lila told her mother she hadn't meant to fall in love. Marina told her daughter she had used the wrong word for what had happened. Elias said something about chemistry and regret. Marina told him chemistry is not a defense, it is a recipe. She asked how long. They answered with different numbers that overlapped in a way that made her want to vomit. Go home, Lila said at last, crying. I'll come by later and we'll talk when everyone is dressed. I am dressed, Marina said. I have been dressed for years while other people undressed me. I have been dressed through funerals and job interviews and immigration offices. I know how to be dressed. Lila tried to touch her. Marina stepped back. This too was a new fact in the world, that the mother's arms would not open when the daughter reached, that the daughter would learn the shape of refusal with the same body that had once been swaddled in acceptance. Marina left. She did not throw the noodles in the trash, she took them, because waste felt like capitulation. She walked the distance home that she would normally take by tram. The city had the decency to rain. That night she wrote in a notebook she had not used since childhood. Not the old breathing manual, that story belonged to another life. This was a plain lined pad from the store near the bakery. At the top of the first page she wrote, "Instructions for not vanishing. Drink water. Not wine. Put the knife in the drawer, blade facing the wall. Sleep with the window cracked open to prove the world is still out there. Do not tell the women at work in a way that invites a chorus. You cannot hold their sympathy and your own spine at the same time. Do not call your dead husband. He cannot answer. If he could, he would tell you to stand up." In the morning, the city did not care what had happened to her because that is what cities do to keep from collapsing. Marina made coffee and did not drink it. She washed the cup anyway. Lila came in the afternoon, small as a mistake. She stood in the doorway like a child who had been asked to count backward. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You don't fix it," Marina said. "You earn a life on the other side of it or you don't." "I love him." "You love the part of yourself that he lit up," Marina said. "A man can be a mirror." "You are admiring your reflection." "That's cruel," Lila whispered. "I will aim for accuracy," Marina said. They talked for hours that did not move the clock. Lila told her she had wanted something that belonged to no one, that a sense of power had crept in like a breeze and become a tunnel. She had kept walking because the walls told her she was chosen. Marina listened and did not soften. She knew the way cruelty has its own gravity and pulls everyone into different orbits of it. She could not throw herself into her daughter's orbit. She would burn. Days passed. Elias sent 3 messages and then a letter folded like origami. Marina read them as one reads the instructions for a machine they will not use. He said he had never meant to hurt her. That intention should count for something. She had been poor. Once, she knew the difference between intention and currency. One buys nothing, Kanya noticed because she noticed everything. She put a bowl of soup in front of Marina and said, "You are either in love or in war. Either way, finish the soup." Marina finished it because obedience sometimes makes a good floor. After closing, Kanya sat across from her with the informal authority of an elder who has earned her sentences. "You can leave," she said. "You have a passport. You have hands. Or you can stay and change the locks around your heart. But don't pretend to do one when you're doing the other." "What did you do?" Marina asked. "I left," Kanya said. "And then I learned to stay." We learn in the wrong order because the world is badly designed. She patted Marina's hand. "You can crash in my office until you decide. The chairs are bad for sleeping but good for choosing." Marina did not sleep in the office. She went home and opened the window and allowed the air to say what it knew, that pain does not always mean you chose wrong. Sometimes it means you are choosing correctly and the cost is due at the door. She told Lila she would be gone for a while. She told no one else where she was going because she did not know until she bought the ticket. 2 flights, 1 layover, the map folding itself into her pocket. She went not to Bangkok, which held too much of the ghost of her as a wife, but to Chiang Mai, where the mountains tugged the sky down by its hem. She rented a room above a cafe that roasted its beans so carefully people spoke to them as if coaxing a child out of a mood. The city held the old alongside the shiny in a way that reassured her. She wrote in her notebook every morning in the quiet between birdsong and scooters, "Your name belongs to you." Write it often. Buy a small thing no one else will touch. A ceramic cup. A hair clip. Do not shrink to fit inside anyone's apology. Learn the names of the streets so you can get lost without being lost. Remember that dignity is not the absence of shame but the decision to carry it correctly. She took long walks. She watched monks move like careful fire. She ate noodles that tasted of the sea and of highways. She dreamed of a door that opened onto a room she had already left. Lila called every 2 days at first, then after a gap that lasted a week, as if she were learning the rhythm of absence like a metronome. She did not talk about Elias, which told Marina everything she needed to know. She talked about work at the bookstore and about a woman who had cried in the aisle of biographies and then apologized to the books for dripping on them. She talked about the apartment upstairs catching fire and the way the firefighters looked like exhausted insects in their suits. She talked about a class she had signed up for on trauma-informed storytelling. "I don't want to make art out of wounds," she said. "I want to make shelters." Marina stayed 2 months. She worked in a kitchen where the chef sang while chopping vegetables and always stood on the side of the river that caught the longer light. She found that the day does not split cleanly into grief and not grief, it frays. She stopped expecting clarity to be merciful. When she returned to Berlin in late autumn, the city seemed to have been waiting in a way that was neither sentimental nor indifferent. The bakery still lifted its shutters at 4. The dog with the single black ear still paused at the second lamppost as if the base held a secret. Lila was thinner, her eyes larger. She hugged her mother too tightly and then not at all, as if afraid to bruise both of them. "I moved out of his place," she said at once, like a child presenting a certificate. "I gave him the key back through a friend." She paused. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you where I live now." "Thank you," Marina said, and set her suitcase down as if she were setting down a small animal that might run. "I brought coffee beans that taste like thunder." They practiced a new language, the language of cautious cohabitation. Some evenings they cooked and said little. Some evenings they talked for hours, not about the wound but about the weather of the day around it. Marina did not tell her daughter what to do with remorse. Remorse is a stain that some people scrub until the cloth tears and others wear like a flag. Lila chose to stitch around it, to make the stain part of the pattern without calling it beautiful. Elias sent 2 more letters. Marina returned one and left the other unopened, because unopenedness can be a kind of reply. He sent no more. It would be tidy for the story to say Marina quickly found a stronger version of herself, that the past's hands fell away. Instead, her mind played tricks when she was tired. The trick in which she was leading both of them by the hand to a bridge and then letting go. The trick in which she was optional at her own dinner table. She learned to interrupt the tricks by naming the objects around her aloud. Chair. Spoon. Window. April, winter threatened early. Kenya asked if Marina would consider taking on more responsibility at the restaurant. "I want to open a second place," she said. "Smaller. A lunchtime thing near the clinic. We'll feed students and nurses. You would run it with me." Marina thought of her hands and of the first time she had entered the kitchen shaking with jet lag and fear. She thought of the little bowl Kenya always set aside for her with extra basil, as if sweetness could be a daily deposit against bitterness. "Yes," she said, quietly enough to make sure she meant it. They found a space with crooked floors and a window that caught the sun like it owed it money. They painted the walls a color that Kenya called green enough. Marina taught a young staff how to blanch greens until they brightened without going limp. She taught them to remember regulars' names, and when they forgot, to ask without pretending they hadn't. She wrote an opening schedule that looked like a prayer, all the tasks lined up like kneeling figures. The clinic's nurses came in wearing exhaustion like jewelry. Students held their hunger with 2 hands and thanked the bowls. Sometimes a patient walked in with their hospital bracelet still clinging, and Marina found she had a way of asking, "How spicy?" That made people feel as if spice could save them. Lila visited between shifts at the bookstore and the trauma class. She brought flyers for a small exhibit featuring work by people who had left hard situations and kept something sacred intact. Marina did not ask if she would put in work about Elias. Lila volunteered none. Their arrangement stood, not a pact of silence, but an agreement to carry the quiet between them gently. One evening in early spring, when daylight lingered rudely against the glass, a man came into the restaurant alone and ordered soup. He looked around with the tentative hope of someone scanning a room for a friend who might or might not arrive. Marina brought him water and asked if he'd like more lime. He said yes and then cleared his throat. "I know this will sound strange. I'm not here to cause trouble. He took a breath. I'm Elias's brother." Marina had not known Elias had a brother. He had placed his history like furniture, a few pieces, used well, nothing too heavy. She set the lime down. "He's not well," the man said. "He won't say this himself. He's begun to complain that he can't hear properly at his left ear. It happens to interpreters sometimes. He keeps working because he thinks he doesn't deserve to stop. I told him I'd try to speak to you. I don't know why I'm here. I'm sorry. It's not fair to you. He's the only brother I have." Marina listened. She felt a small door in her chest try to open. She placed her hand over it kindly. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I hope he finds a way to live that doesn't hurt him." "Do you want me to tell him you said that?" "No," she said, and meant it. After he left, she went into the back, leaned against the cool metal of the refrigerator, and let herself weep without sound. Kenya found her there and did not ask questions. She handed her a towel. "You can cry while you stir," she said. "We have orders." Marina stirred. The crying passed like weather. She went back to the floor and asked the nurses about their day. One of them laughed and said, "Better, now," and in that laugh Marina heard a confirmation that work can be the right kind of forgetting. Months braided themselves. The clinic restaurant became a place people assigned to themselves in their calendars as take care. Kenya put a tip jar on the counter labeled for good gloves and then privately used the money to pay one employee's tuition deposit. Marina bought a second-hand camera lens to fit the one Elias had given her, not as a shrine to him, but as a way to look at the world with sharper edges. She took photographs of the steam lifting from a pot and of a nurse's hands cupped around a bowl and of Lila's back as she crossed the street under a sky-like tin. Lila brought a man to dinner once, a man with a soft voice and an impatience with cruelty. He was gentle with the servers and arrogant only with his own despair. He and Lila did not hold hands. Marina liked him the way you like a good umbrella, grateful, cautious, unsurprised when the wind flips it inside out and it still works. On the anniversary of the day she had opened the bedroom door, Marina cooked alone at home. She made rice that took exactly the time the evening took to arrive. She did not call Lila to say what day it was. She did not light a candle. She was not interested in inviting ritual. She ate standing up and then washed the dish. Afterwards, she opened a drawer and took out the 2 letters from Elias, one still unopened, and walked to the canal. She did not throw them into the water because littering is a failure of imagination. She placed them in a public book exchange box instead, where strangers could take what they wanted without knowing the origin story of the paper. The phone call came in late summer. Lila's number. A street siren in the background. "Don't panic," Lila said, which is the sentence that makes panic a dog tugging loose. "I'm at the clinic." "It's not me." A woman came in whose husband is shouting in the hallway. "I didn't know who else to call." "I'm 5 minutes away," Marina said, already walking, the city parting like flax. She arrived at the clinic restaurant before Lila could say another sentence. The hallway was bright and badly designed for kindness. A man with a red face listed grievances against the air. A nurse stood between him and a door. Marina stepped beside the nurse as if she had always planned to be exactly there. "Sir," she said. "You need to eat." "I need my wife," he snapped. "You need to eat so you don't faint while you apologize later," Marina said, and held out a paper bowl with rice and egg and basil. He took it out of habit more than agreement and then realized his mouth had agreed in advance. He began to eat as if to prove to everyone he didn't care. His body betrayed him by easing. In the moment that his mouth was full, the nurse slipped into the room he'd guarded and shut it firmly behind her. Lila exhaled a singular breath. The kind that empties a bank vault. After the man was escorted to a different waiting area with a social worker whose calm could hold an afternoon, Lila sat with her mother on the bench near the vending machines. "You didn't scold me for getting involved," she said quietly. "You called me," Marina said. "That is involvement enough." "I keep imagining other versions of myself," Lila said. "One that never met him. One that met him and told him to go home. One that didn't call you today because she was afraid you'd say this is not our business." "I used to imagine other versions, too," Marina said. "It makes the present thin." "I cannot live in a thin present." Lila nodded. "I'm not asking you to bless me," she said after a moment. "I'm asking you not to abandon me." "I won't abandon you," Marina said. "But I may refuse some rooms you invite me into." "That's fair," Lila said, and leaned her head on her mother's shoulder as if it were the first pillow ever invented. The following week, Marina received a letter from a lawyer, not Elias's brother, but a firm with a name that sounded like dry earth. Inside was a concise proposal, a formal dissolution of the informal partnership between Marina and Elias, a statement of property he swore he had never shared and she had never asked for, an attached check with more zeros than made sense. The letter's tone was polite, the kind of politeness that expects to be obeyed. She brought it to Kenya and then to a legal aid clinic whose chairs were designed to survive the end of the world. The woman who advised her had a scarf patterned with constellations and a way of saying HM that rearranged the furniture of a situation. "Do I have to respond?" Marina asked. "You have to decide if you want to give the silence a frame," the woman said. If you do, you should respond in writing and keep a copy. You should not cash the check unless you wish to be quiet on someone else's terms. I do not wish to be quiet on anyone's terms, Marina said. I wish to be quiet on my own. Then write that, the woman said. Marina wrote, I decline your offer. I decline your story. My silence belongs to me. She sealed the letter and mailed it near the bakery, which gave the act a domestic blessing. She kept the check not as money but as a paper that could be folded into a paper crane, which she did one evening with Lila at the table, both of them laughing at how ugly the crane came out, how it seemed to be apologizing for flight. By autumn, the second restaurant had its own regulars, its own jar of coins for gloves, its own wall with photographs Marina had taken of the hands of people caught mid-gesture. On opening day months earlier, a nurse had asked why there were no faces on the wall. Because we forget hands, Marina had said. And because some faces are not safe to show. Now, patrons greeted the photographs like colleagues. Someone had taped a small note under one, "These are my sister's hands." At night, Marina sometimes dreamed of a door she almost opened, then didn't, then opened again to find nothing inside, not because the room was empty but because emptiness was the wrong word for a room that had been repurposed. She woke thinking of how grief is not an event but a new setting on the stove, medium-low heat that keeps things from spoiling if you watch. When Lila's exhibit opened, small, careful, lit as if the lights cared about the art, Marina went early and stayed late. Lila had called the series structures that refuse collapse, and there were bridges and kitchen tables and a photograph of a woman's forearm with a faint scar shaped like a coastline. There were captions that did not dramatize, only named. Beneath a picture of a building with scaffolding that had been up so long the neighborhood forgot the original facade, the caption read, "The work is still being done. The work is still being done." People cried, quietly, the way the civilized cry, with their lips pressed into themselves. Lila stood by the door and thanked everyone as if she were receiving them into a home they were safe to leave. Marina watched her daughter move through the room with care, not for the art, which would survive by being ignored or touched, but for the people who believed. For an hour, that looking made them brave. After midnight, they walked home carrying the unsold postcards. The city had forgiven itself for being noisy. "I don't expect you to forget," Lila said without preface. "I don't expect time to change what happened. I expect time to change me. Making expectations that belong to yourself only." Marina said. "This is adulthood." "I hated adulthood before I tried it," Lila said. "Now I just dislike it, which seems like progress." They laughed standing in the kitchen. Marina thought of the first apartment they had rented in Berlin, above the bakery, the way sugar had risen like certainty in the air, and she realized the recipe of their life had changed entirely but still required stirring and watching and sitting with something while it simmered. On a Sunday not long after, a young couple came into the clinic restaurant with a newborn and a hunger that frightened them. The woman cried when she tasted the soup. "It's just soup," she said, apologizing to the spoon. "It's not just soup." Marina said. "It's heat that arrived when you asked for it." She carried the baby so the mother could eat with both hands. The baby's face scrunched into an expression that looked like an essay. Kanya came out from the kitchen with a bowl of cut fruit and made a joke about how babies judge every room they enter. The couple laughed, which is medicine no one will prescribe but everyone remembers to buy. That night, when the restaurant was quiet and the knives were asleep, Marina sat in the corner and opened the notebook again. Do not erect a shrine to pain. It will ask for flowers you cannot afford. Speak kindly to the part of you that wishes you had been crueler. Pay attention to who returns borrowed books. Remember, refusal is a form of love, for yourself, for the life you have to carry. When the memory comes at a bad angle, turn your head a little. Different light. She closed the notebook and let the room sit with her. She thought of the check folded into a bird. She thought of the camera that had once felt like a debt and now felt like a tool. She thought of Lila asleep somewhere on a sofa in a room full of people who trusted her, and she allowed herself the privacy of joy. Winter came again, as it always does. The bakery still rose before dawn. The dog with the black ear grew slower but no less interested in lampposts. Marina's hands hurt sometimes, and she wore the lined gloves Elias had given her without thinking of him, which felt like a graduate-level achievement in survival. One evening Lila brought home a stack of letters from people who had seen the exhibit and now wanted to tell someone, anyone, what they had lived through. They had addressed them to the woman who knew how to title a photograph without reducing it. Lila read them aloud in a voice that turned each sentence into a steadying hand. When she finished the last one, she said, "I used to think I had to climb out of my worst act. I think now I have to build around it, good room by good room." "Rooms can have windows," Marina said. "Open them." "I want to put in a skylight," Lila said, and they both smiled at the ceiling as if it might agree. On the second anniversary of the betrayal, nothing dramatic happened. Marina went to work. So did Lila. The knife's blade still faced the wall. The window was still cracked open at night. The city persisted. Someone left a bouquet of eucalyptus on the restaurant counter with no note. Marina placed it in a jar and put it near the register where everyone could smell it. "It is none of our business who leaves us what we need," she wrote in the notebook later, "and it is all of our business to use it wisely." In the spring that followed, the second restaurant won a small award from a local paper that liked to notice what national papers forgot. The citation read, "For teaching a neighborhood to pause before it bites." Kanya taped the article to the wall and drew a star next to Marina's name. "You see?" she said. Staying is also a verb. One evening, as twilight argued its case for being allowed to remain longer, a woman came in alone. She was around Marina's age, or perhaps exactly the age of women who keep more than 1 year in their faces. She ordered a bowl that did not ask much of her teeth. When she finished, she stayed sitting with her hands around the empty bowl as if she were warming them at a fire. "Was it all right?" Marina asked, clearing the table. "It was survival in a bowl," the woman said. "I don't know what else to call it." "That will do," Marina said. The woman hesitated. Then said, "Do you know the feeling when you got out of something, but it still walks beside you like a twin?" "I do," Marina said, not asking for details. "I started walking faster." The woman laughed once, a sound like a dropped coin. "And did the twin keep up?" "Sometimes," Marina said. "Sometimes it needed to stop and tie its shoe." The woman nodded as if given a prescription. She left a tip that made no sense for the price of the meal. Marina pressed the bill back into her hand. "Buy yourself a small thing no one else will touch," she said. "A cup. A clip. A postcard you don't have to mail." After closing, Marina walked home along the canal and thought about the kind of love the world keeps trying to rename. She thought of her dead husband and how the teak chair would live a second life in a stranger's kitchen. She thought of the worst version of herself she had not become. She thought of Lila's belief that the work is still being done. At home, she opened the camera and took a photograph of her own hands on the windowsill, the bones particular and unashamed. In the frame you could see the cracked strip of sky that Berlin gives to anyone willing to look up long enough, pale, generous, neither promising nor withholding. She printed the photograph on cheap paper and taped it inside the cupboard where she kept salt and tea. Each morning, when she reached for the salt, she saw those hands and remembered the rule she had not written but practiced. Life forward, but keep what you learned on the reachable shelf. One day, many days later, she answered the phone to hear Elias's voice, softened by something she couldn't name. "Rin," he said. "I wanted to tell you I'm leaving Berlin. There is work in Lisbon." "My ear," he paused. "It is quieter than it should be. I'm teaching more. I thought you should know in case the city told you I hadn't said goodbye." "Goodbye," Marina said, and let the word sit, solid and sufficient. After they hung up, she made tea and added sugar because sometimes sorrow is simply the absence of a certain sweetness, and sometimes sweetness is not negotiation, only seasoning. When Lila came over later and asked why the apartment smelled like eucalyptus, Marina shrugged. "Someone brought some to the restaurant," she said, and Lila did not ask who. They ate rice and fish they had steamed with too much ginger. They talked about a grant Lila had applied for that would let her run a workshop on telling hard stories without making them entertainment. They argued about whether kitchen towels should be folded or crumpled on the rack. Both. The answer was both. They laughed. They washed the dishes, the old choreography of consolation, and the sound of water on porcelain thickened the air with domestic mercy. After Lila left, Marina went to the window. The city was what it always was, imperfect and sufficient. She opened the notebook, the pages now bent like wings, and added a last set of instructions not for survival but for living. Do not fear repairs that show. People trust the seam. Teach your hands something new each year. Keep a key for a friend who will never misuse it. When you hear a siren, wish the stranger well. If a door must be opened, open it in daylight. Then she put the notebook back on the shelf beside the cheap ceramic cup she had bought in Chiang Mai, the camera that had changed uses, and the paper crane with too many creases. She turned off the light, left the window cracked, and lay down with the particular tiredness of a person who has done the day honestly. The night came not as a verdict but as a blanket, woven from all the hours she had stitched together, durable enough to survive the wash. She slept, and in her sleep walked through a house that had rooms she had built herself, rooms with skylights and windows that opened, rooms with tables that did not wobble, rooms with doors that shut when she asked them to and opened when she was ready. In the kitchen of that dream house, a pot simmered at medium-low, steady and patient, releasing a fragrance she knew well, a small, stubborn feast of basil and pepper and a future that tasted exactly like now.